If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths, and sometimes heights, to ensure the power is always flowing. Which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Ben Dubose here, Paolo Alves there. Thanks for tuning in to another new episode of The Logger Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Dubose and Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA. And you can also follow my Rockets coverage at USA Today's Rockets Wire and at Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. We're recording this show on Tuesday night, October 24th, on the eve of the 2023-24 regular season opener for your Rockets. Things start off Wednesday night in Orlando. Houston is coming off a 4-1 preseason, and they've got 7 of the first 9 games within the friendly confines of Toyota Center. Again, not including the opener in Orlando, followed by Friday night's game in San Antonio. After that, a season-long homestand of 7 games. So hopefully there's an opportunity for Ime Udoka to get this squad off to a decent start as the rebuild transitions to what Ime and general manager Rafael Stone have consistently called Phase 2. On today's show, we are going to be discussing the first few games of the season, along with all the associated roster moves and cuts as the Rockets finalize things for the new season. But to start off, I want to talk about general expectations. Let's use this as a time capsule, if you will, of laying out our goals prior to the season, and then we can review the tape in April once the season ends and see if the progress was met. Paolo, I'll be honest, for me, I actually have a lot more butterflies going into tomorrow than I have in some time. Because I think the last couple of years, well, for starters, we were spoiled by having the Astros in the World Series during the first couple of weeks of the NBA season. Unfortunately, that's not the case this year, with the Astros losing in Game 7 of the League Championship Series to the hated Rangers. Womp womp. But I think another element is that the last couple of years, no matter what happened, we could always pivot to, well, things are going to be better when they upgrade the coach, which they did this offseason from Steven Silas to Ime Udoka. Things will be better when they spend the $60 million in cap room and bring in all these veterans. Well, now they've done that with Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks and Jeff Green and Jock Landale and so on and so forth. Aaron Holiday. Moving forward, they're probably not going to have cap room other than the mid-level exception, which nearly all teams have around the NBA. So there's not a clear avenue to get better. We would also say, even if the culture's not right, well, whatever, it'll get fixed with the new coach and you'll bring in even more young players, cycle out some people that might be problems on the culture side. And of course, the Rockets had full control of the draft capital. So we knew, especially last year, it was the Wemby year. But at a bare minimum, you're going to get someone high, which you did with Amen Thompson, then supplemented that with Cam Whitmore in the back half of the first round. The point is, even if things didn't go well, it was always easy to sort of say, what does it really matter? Things are going to be better down the line because the Rockets are going to get more assets. They're going to bring in veterans because they have all this salary cap room. They can upgrade the coaching staff and so on and so forth. It was always clear that there was a path to improve, even if that season didn't go well. And to some degree, you didn't want it to go well because you wanted to maximize that draft capital. So the end result is that the games just weren't all that meaningful. Even if the worst case happened, and clearly it did, since you're coming off 3 straight years at the bottom of the Western Conference, at the end of the day, it didn't really matter in the grand scheme because there was a clear way to upgrade. And in some ways, because you fully controlled your draft pick, now this year you do have top 4 protection, but I don't think you want to bank on that by any means. It was always easy to find a silver lining. This year, The Rockets need to take a step forward. They've talked about phase two. They've talked about progressing in the rebuild. We know that unless the pick is in the top four, they lose it to Oklahoma City. There's a lot of reasons in terms of the timetable that the Rockets need to move forward. And I would just say, at the highest possible level, what I want from the Rockets in this upcoming season is to feel closer to a championship in April than I do right now. And there are two ways, in my opinion, that that can happen. And there's probably some overlap in these. Number one is that at least one member, and hopefully more, of your core six looks like a player that could be an all-star down the line. Because to win a championship, you probably need multiple all-star level players, legit top 15, top 20 in the league types, someone that can be the top or number two option on a championship level team on at least one side of the ball, and preferably both. I think it's too much to ask. Well, I know it's too much to ask of anyone in their first three NBA seasons, like the core six of the Rockets: Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, and Cam Whitmore, who are just rookies. But I do think, especially with the year three guys in Jalen and LP, it's reasonable to see flashes, especially going into a contract off season where the Rockets are eligible to give them extensions. There's a reason why the deals line up this way. Typically, for most players that get to that tier eventually, you start seeing signs by the third season that they're capable of doing that. And while they're not going to do it for the season as a whole, you do want to see those flashes, because what the Rockets did this offseason, signing guys like Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, Jeff Green to improve the culture, they didn't do anything transformational. They didn't go the James Harden path. They basically went the Fred path because they wanted to let their own guys develop into those transformational type pieces. The point of passing on James Harden is so that you could run more offense through Jalen Green, through Alperen Sengun, and so on and so forth. So now it's time for them to actually take advantage of those extra reps. And hopefully that happens. And if they go out and have a big season, then yeah, the Rockets are absolutely going to be closer in April, and the wins will likely reflect it. The other area, and it probably does overlap, is simply in the win-loss record. The Rockets come off a 22-60 season. If Houston can improve by 10 plus games and get into, let's say, the mid to high 30s, that's the kind of thing where even if somehow it isn't accompanied by a true breakout from any of your core six, and let's be clear, with Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore, it's not like they have to do anything drastic, and they probably won't as rookies. Of course, we'd love it if they're the exception to the rule somehow. But even if you don't have that level of breakout in year one, or from any of your core six in their first 3 years, if Ime Udoka is good enough as a coach, we know how liked he is around the NBA. If he's good enough as a coach to get the Rockets a dramatically improved win total alongside those veterans, then that in and of itself is going to be the type of move up the standings that probably makes the Rockets, especially when combined with Houston as a destination, attractive to players on the trade market who could fill that role as a top 15, top 20 type alpha if you aren't able to develop internally. We've talked about Joel Embiid in the past as one example. If the Rockets get to the mid to high 30s and improve by 10 to 15 games from a season ago without adding a true superstar to the mix, that's the kind of growth, when combined with a strong market in Houston, that would be very attractive around the league and probably give Rafael Stone opportunities to get that guy elsewhere, even if it doesn't develop internally. Now, the odds are, if the Rockets improve by that much, it's a combination of the two. It's because, in large part, one of those young guys does take the leap, at least one of them, and then you have the best of both worlds. You look like you have a couple of young prospects on the cusp of something special, and then maybe you're desirable on top of that to marquee guys across the league, and you can supplement your young core by adding one of those guys. That's the ideal scenario. But for me, that's what I'm looking for out of this season. It's not so much, oh, they have to make a play-in push. It's not so much they have to win X games. It's not that strict when we discuss what the criteria is. For me, it's that the ball needs to be moved forward in terms of, by April, the Rockets look closer to a title than they are right now, or putting a title team together, I should say. Because if the Rockets go out this year and only win a few more games, if they're still in the mid 20s, I'm not sure where you go from here. It's not over because, of course, Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore are just rookies. So no matter what they do in year one, it's not like you should be too low on them. There's always a possibility that one or both of those guys develop into your him, if you will. But if the Rockets don't make much of a headway this year, then I don't know what you do with Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun next offseason when they're eligible for extensions. I don't know how attractive you are around the league if you're still winning in the 20s and are one of the worst teams in the Western Conference. And it's not as if you have cap room to go out and overpay the way you did a year ago. It would largely feel, at least to me, like you're stuck and like the rebuild at a bare minimum is on a much more prolonged timetable, because at a bare minimum you would have to wait for, you know, Amen and Cam to take that leap. And who knows, maybe you have to bottom out even more with regards to hoping for that top 4 and top 10 protection the next couple of years on your picks to kick in and to continue building through the draft. So for me, I want to feel by April that there's a clear path for this team within, let's say, 2 to 3 years to get at a legitimate contending level. And if they're not there, it's not that the rebuild is a failure, but you need to buckle in, and things could last a lot longer than any of us would like. Because to me, that's what's at stake for this year. People don't realize that unlike the last couple of years, there's no clear lever to pull if things don't work. They cash their chips in. This is what they've got. And so for me, above any one player or any one win mark, there's got to be a clear path. Right now, it's the core 6, and we say, okay, we think among these 6, at least, 2 or 3 may develop into this tier of player. By April, I want to have a better idea as to who that might be. Right now, we're just sort of looking at them in a bucket. By the end of this season, I want to have an idea, okay, this is who's most likely to actually become that guy. And hopefully that's in tandem with a rise up the standings, because if that's the case, if you're winning mid to high 30s and you're one of the it teams on the rise, then you may be able to supplement that with a big time trade addition from the outside. But to me, that's what I'm trying to accomplish for this season. We'll see in April. We'll come back to this and see if the Rockets have lived up to, I suppose, that lofty expectation. But that's where I'm at. Paolo, what are your thoughts on the eve of the opener in Orlando?
Yeah, to me, I think I agree with some of what you said. I disagree with some of what you said as well. I think, to me, two things I'm really looking to. I mean, I'm placing a win total goal. I think you've got to win. The bare minimum is 30 games. I would project 35 on a good season. I think our ceiling's like 40, which is very optimistic. And I mean, I want to be optimistic. That being said, besides the win total, I'm looking at defensive intensity. And although guys have looked better and worse throughout the 5 games of preseason, it's preseason, but still, I think the intensity level has been there. And I'm okay-ish if the intensity level is there, but they're missing reads, or they're not being able to chase through screens, especially for Jalen Green. I'm not okay with it, but I'm more okay with it than if what happens here is what happens with a lot of young teams. I think the first thing that always comes to mind to me is the Timberwolves and the Pelicans over the last few years, and the Suns before they got Chris Paul, is they're young teams with a lot of talent. The talent fits together, but once things start to fall apart, they never pick back up. Luckily, I think the Rockets have a fair. And then we'll get into it, but I think the Rockets have a fairly easy-ish, I mean, for the context, start to the season, so that shouldn't happen. But it may happen at the middle point of the season where the schedule gets tougher. So I want to see the defensive intensity there. I think that's by far the hardest step to take as a young team, because, well, usually there's a lot of young players, and it's not just that they're young. It's when you're drafting guys, usually you're drafting for offensive upside because you're trying to get a star. With the Timberwolves, they had Wiggins, who was a good defender but wasn't focusing on that side of the ball. They had Karl Anthony Towns, just guys that their main players weren't, especially dedicated to defense. So that's what I'm looking for. That's the number one priority. The number two priority is I want to finally see some efficiency. We will be getting better shots. Efficiency will still be hurt a little bit by what seems like Udoka's game plan for offense, which is a lot of makeshift, just run in transition and try to make stuff happen off of the defensive intensity that they want to apply. But we project Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Jalen Green as guys that are easy to build around, as opposed to Sengun, because they can shoot, and if they can shoot, they can be plugged into a lot of different offenses. It's the first step towards being versatile, right? Well, they can shoot in theory. I want to see it in practice. I want to see Jalen shoot 36% from three. I want to see Jabari Smith shoot upwards of 36% from three as well. Like, that's the bare minimum. That's what I want to start seeing, because once you start seeing those numbers on the paper, that's when, well, we as fans and just national media in general start looking at a player and saying, oh, maybe this guy's in the chucker because, he's being average efficiency-wise. So I really want to see an efficiency jump from this team, and particularly from the young players that are supposed to be plug and play on many different team roster construction type archetypes. And so, besides that, the other thing that I would mention going into the season is, and people will label me a hater as they always do, and honestly, I am bringing this up kind of out of the blue. It's not really the question you asked, but I guess I'll tie a positive and a negative together. I'll start with the positive, which is Jabari Smith Jr. has looked like a completely different player in preseason, and that's probably my main narrative or my main storyline heading into the season.
That's your main agenda.
Yeah.
Agenda pushing.
Is Jabari Smith going to keep looking like this? Is he going to keep shooting? He's shot, I think, 47% from three, but obviously that's not realistic. But will he be shooting, as a good shooter, not just an average shooter? Will he be 38, 40% from three? He looks a lot stronger. The shot it's going in a lot more. He's looking a lot more confident on his face-up game, on his post game, the fadeaways, everything. Is this just a preseason thing, or is this something that we can start adding on when projecting his ceiling? Because if so, he goes from a guy that was one of the worst players last year, who at one point I was like, hey, listen, I'm not gonna panic, but I'm no longer projecting. I'm no longer giving him a realistic chance to become a star type player. But I think it's pretty safe to assume he'll be a good role player, a Otto Porter type or Robert Covington type, at the very least. So he'll be useful no matter what, even though he had a terrible season. If he keeps flashing what he's flashing, well, it can come from that to, well, I'm fairly certain he's going to be that role player that I mentioned, but there's some upside here for him to be, the third best player, the second best player, or if it really goes off the rails, the best player on the championship team. You start seeing that upside with the shot making, especially when you add on to that the impact that he can have on defense, even though he's struggled in preseason at times. That's like looking at Jabari Smith as a true core piece, as a guy that can contend to being the best player on this team down the line, is a massive difference to me, and it all hinges on how he looks offensively and how efficient he can be. Because if he is efficient, then you can start giving him these reps out of the post, or he can start being your go-to guy when offense is just not getting anything, because he can get his shot off, and regardless of the defense, unless he's being defended by like Wemby or Chet Holmgren or something like that. So that's the biggest thing for me, and that gets me really excited, because transitioning into the more negative part of it is Alperen Sengun. He's looked impressive for his standards defensively, right? Still, he's looked impressive defensively, but he looks completely out of sync offensively, and you can't overreact to how he looked defensively and at the same time ignore how he looked offensively, if you know what I mean. Because well, you can say it's just, if you say it's just preseason for one thing, you should say it's just preseason for the other. And even his defensive improvement, like he's improved to being okay, or he looks okay on a team that is surrounded by three guys that are really good defenders in Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, and Jabari Smith Jr., and a guy that's not so great in Jalen Green. And so one of my main takeaways is the way he's being used on offense, right? He gets a lot of high post touches, he gets a lot of elbow touches, trying to feed cutters and stuff like that. They've basically gone completely away from giving him post ups. They've done so in the fourth quarters when the team's no longer running any type of rotation, or late third quarters when the team's no longer running the game plan. When you're mixing in Morecambe with more minutes, and you're seeing Aaron Holiday, and you're seeing a bunch of guys, and it's more of a mess. Other than that, they fed him on mismatches sometimes, right? Like I would say, like what, 4 a game, if that much. When you combine that with the fact that Ime clearly wanted Brook Lopez, and the front office clearly wanted Brook Lopez really badly, they were willing to go as far as $30 million a year, although for 2 years for him, even though they didn't get a chance to offer it because we got into that in a past
Right.
episode. You combine those two, and you combine the type of defense that they want to run, and you combine the type of bigs that Ime Udoka used in Boston, and it's not hard to, and you combine that with the type of offense that the Rockets are trying to run right now, which is we're going to try to get stops, and we're going to try and run in transition, and we're trying to avoid half-court offense as much as possible, and we're going to be running up and down the floor like we're a young team. Steve Martellus talked about this, even though he couldn't implement it. We're going to wear other teams out. Well, this is not Alperen Sengun's profile at all. He excelled with Steven Silas because he was our only guy in the half court that could reliably create for himself. And so it goes back to the same debate. If you're going to keep him and have him be worth the defensive struggles, and right now offensive struggles as well, even though he's not struggling defensively, you can get, being okay is not the barometer right now, right? Being okay is the barometer if you're awesome on offense as a big. If you're not being awesome on offense, not being used on offense, then the bar at defense is being really good, because most bigs in the NBA are really good unless they're offensive bigs.
Right.
So what I'm getting to is, when you look at all the parameters that I said before, it just doesn't fit. And then even you can have Sengun adapt to these things, right? But if you're not going to lean into it offensively, then you're once again fitting a square peg into a round hole, because you're trying to make Alperen Sengun something that he's not. And as I said, the way you fix that is you either lean into it completely, and you make him a staple of your half-court offense, and you give him the opportunity to score, and you play a little bit slower as a result of that, but that's okay because he's really good. Or you keep striving to be the team that Ime Udoka seems to want us to be, which is the defensive minded team that tries to run as much and not play much half-court offense, which is going to work fine in the regular season. They're going to struggle in the playoffs if they make it, but that's a problem for later on. This to say, it's not hard to imagine that they're trying to make it work, and they will. I'm not saying that they will trade him or anything. I'm saying that I wouldn't be surprised if they moved in a different direction sooner than a lot of people expect, just because you're asking him to do something that doesn't fit his skill set, and if you're trying to win, you're going to be punished for that.
And you do have an inflection point next summer with his contract.
Exactly.
So that could force something sooner than a lot of fans are ready for. And hopefully if he goes out and has a moderately productive season, and you're able to trade him before the extension, so the team acquiring him would theoretically have control for as much as 5 years, then yeah, it might be an opportunity to sell high, especially if the team has success. Because if the team wins more games, then perhaps that gives you a window in which you can say, hey, he was a part of a team that succeeded, a young team that's on the rise. He can contribute to winning. And then ultimately you make that move down the line for a piece that's going to be a bit more linear with what Ime wants to do.
Yeah, and I think they haven't come out and said it, of course, and they're going to. And while he's here, they're going to try and make him work. That doesn't change the fact that now that you're gearing a team towards winning, and I think Ime Udoka, you can probably correct. You probably have better information than I do, but I think Ime Udoka is probably above all of these players as far as the state they get the say they get, or maybe not Ime Thompson, but the say that he gets in how this team moves going forward. I mean, Fred VanVleet is a Ime Udoka signing. Dylan Brooks is an Ime Udoka signing, or even though I'm sure Rafael Stone was involved in the process, those are very Ime Udoka type players, and I get the sense that they're trying to make Ime Udoka a Bob, a Spolster type coach, and they're trying to have him build an identity that they can keep through a decade.
Yeah.
Right, and he's that type of coach, and if he's that type of coach, eventually you're going to adjust your team to fit that identity. And that just really isn't what Alperen Sengun is as a basketball player.
Yeah, if you're going to maximize him, he is your system.
Exactly. Right? That's what we've been talking about all along. That's why, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Sengun, while Salas was here, I was clamoring for him for them to run through him, not only because he was the best half-court player they had, but because you needed to see it, right? We haven't gotten to see it, and from if these 5 games are any indication, we aren't going to get to see a Shen Hub type offense.
Yeah.
That may change throughout the season. Who knows? But I don't think that we will. Which leads me to my last point on this very long diatribe that I've gone on. So, looking at the rest of the core pieces, what gets me really excited is that you look at Jabari Smith Jr. and you look at Ime Thompson and you look at Jalen Green, and those guys fit together perfectly. I mean, even for Jalen Green himself, right? I think Jalen Green eventually becomes. I mean, I think Jalen will always be more suited to guard ones than he will be to guard twos. He's just really quick. He's stronger, but he's still somewhat skinny. But I think he'll always be more suited to guard point guards, even though he'll have to improve his screen navigation, than he will be to guard wings. And I hadn't really thought about this to this point, but Ime Thompson is perfect for a guy like that. I mean, it's hard to find a better defensive fit with Jalen than Ime because, well, Ime's probably also better at guarding twos than he'll be at guarding ones just because of his size. And so you can have this tandem that on offense, Ime is the 1 and Jalen's the 2. On defense, they switch. And Jalen probably guards the Ja Morants of the world, like we were clamoring for last season when KPJ was guarding them and getting blown by every single possession. And that also requires, usually, if Jalen's guarding the main ball handler or usually the point guard, it also requires less defensive attention of him when he's off the ball, which is something that he has struggled with. Because, I mean, if you're guarding Ja Morant, or Luka Doncic, he's not going to be moving much off ball. It's probably easier to keep up with, and more will be asked of you when you're on ball because you'll be on ball more times. But off ball, it'll probably be easier. So all of this to say, those two fit together really well. And then you've got Jabari Smith, who fits well with basically anybody on any team.
Plug and play.
And then,
yeah.
And then you add on Tarvison, which is the same thing. And Cam Whitmore, who has the defensive versatility, in my opinion, to play through 2 through 4. And now, you look at that and that type of defensive versatility and the type of shooting that you're getting and the switchability with these guys just suits Ime Udoka perfectly. And then sadly, Onyeka Okongwu got signed to an extension, which was a steal, by the way. But you look at next offseason and the Rockets, I mean, if they waive Jock Landale, who's non-guaranteed, if they waive Jeff Green, who's non-guaranteed, if they don't pick up the team option on Jayshawn Tate, they can get to, I think, about 30-something million in cap space. Subtract that from that, whatever the roster charges are, in order to get all the way back to you guys know what I'm talking about. But you're looking at 25 to 30 million a year. Not a year, in cap space if you want to. And, well, Onyeka Okongwu was one of those guys that would fit perfectly in a team built around the players that I just mentioned. But you also have Nick Claxton's a free agent. And he fits that perfectly as well. And I think Jonas Valanciunas is also a free agent, but he's not that great at that skill set in particular. And then you look at Atlanta, well, they just extended the Okongwu, so Clint Capella is likely going to be available for trade, if not this year, then next year. And the Rockets have all of the salary to match. We know the Rockets love Miles Turner. He would fit perfectly into this team as well. But this to say that besides Alperen Sengun, if these guys pan out the way that we think that they pan out, they fit together perfectly defensively. And not only do they fit together perfectly, they fit what I think the philosophy of the team is. Because I mean, if you're drafting Ime Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., and Tyrese in the last 3 drafts, I think it's pretty clear that you value defensive versatility above a lot of other things. And so now you add on to that Ime Udoka, who also values these things, right? I mean, look at Robert Williams, Al Horford, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, and Derek White. Extremely versatile defense, and it you start to see the vision of what this team could eventually be when they're contending, because the pieces start to fit together, which is why I started off by saying how good Jabari looks, because he's a key piece to this puzzle, and then how Alperen Sengun doesn't. There's been multiple signs that Alperen Sengun doesn't really fit into that vision. It's because, well, everybody else basically fits perfectly, and you can argue that because everybody else fits perfectly, they can make up for Sengun's deficiencies. But when you're trying to maximize a team for a championship, you're not trying to make up for other people's deficiencies unless they're like a superstar. Like making up for James Harden's defense in the playoffs by having, 4 great defenders around him is fine, because
Right.
James Harden's a superstar and he makes it worth it. If you replace James Harden with CJ McCollum, who is still a great player but not a superstar level, well, at that point it's not worth it to give up what you need to give up defensively for that that offensive output, because you only do that for true superstar players. Which goes back to the conversation: is Sengun going to be a true superstar player that's worth doing that? But yeah, just want to say that that's a really long way of saying that I'm really excited for what a potential big 3 of Jalen Green, Ime Thompson, and Jabari Smith looks like, because, well, we knew Jalen Green had a really high ceiling already. And Ime Thompson is looked better than I expected early on, but drafting him was always about the upside. And now Jabari Smith is flashing a level of upside that we didn't see at all the first year. And now you can start to imagine a team structure where you have these 3 go-to guys, and then you have Tyrese and Cam Whitmore, who are all very scalable players up and down usage, and you see a clear way of upgrading if you're going to follow that philosophy, and with a really good asset, which is Jason Tate, which is Alperen Sengun, sorry. You still have picks and you have cap space, and there's a lot of ways that you can look to start to implement that vision down the line. And so you ask me what I wanted to see this year. I want to see those 3 main guys that I just mentioned. I want to see them be efficient, so I can confidently say we may not need an offensive dynamo like Alperen Sengun, because these guys can, while retaining their defensive versatility, these guys can have the offensive upside to hold an offense on their own, and you can go for a lockdown defensive team, because those guys are going to be good enough at offense to carry the load without you needing a James Harden type compromise of sacrificing mightily one position on defense to get the offense that the rest of your defensive players can produce.
You mentioned Ime potentially being a Greg Popovich or Eric Spoelstra type coach where he's the culture. Jackson Gatlin had a really good point on the season preview Locked on Rockets that I did. I'm not even sure if it's out yet. If not, it's probably is by the time our listeners are hearing this. It's a season preview with myself, Jackson, and Frank F Tank on Twitter. I believe F Tank 58. But Jackson made the point that in the Rockets branding, you're seeing everything rolled out as far as marketing campaigns, billboards around town. And honestly, it looks like Ime is front and center rather than any one player. And some of that is because, as I was saying earlier, you have this core 6, but in terms of who from that core 6 is actually going to be your front and center guys that can potentially be cornerstones for a contender down the line, that's still to be determined. But I think it's also because that's the system that Ime wants to run, that it's not about any 1 or 2 players, but it's more, I suppose, organic. I know that's a terrible word to use on Rocket social media these days, but it's something that can be replicated in other ways because it's a template that you can adopt and sort of plug and play. And I think
Yeah,
that's why
you
Jabari and
still
Tari fit so well.
exactly, and people have been saying, Nathan Falk said that, this offense by committee thing is kind of a mirage, that it doesn't work in real life, and just that it sounds really good on paper. And my counter to that is, while I agree, you can have, if your culture is being a really good defensive team that's going to get out on the break, you can have offense by committee, but still have a hierarchy when the game slows down in the playoffs, or in the fourth quarter, when you need to run half court offense. And that's exactly why what I just brought up matters, because, well, if Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, and Jabari Smith Jr., Jalen Green and Jabari Smith as tough shot makers, guys that can generate their own shot fairly easily, and Amen is just downhill pressure guy that can kick out to high IQ guy that can kick out to shooters.
He
If
does need
these
to get
guys
his
can,
handle a lot tighter,
he
but
does.
I see the vision. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you can become that good defensive team, that most, like 60% of the offense is just trying to catch teams off in fast breaks, or catch teams off balance, then you're only going to notice that hierarchy in close games in the fourth quarter, which the Rockets haven't had up to this point. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to, or haven't played the starters in up to this point. So maybe there is a hierarchy. We just haven't gotten to see it yet,
Yeah.
because, well, the game hasn't evolved into half court offense that
You're fine.
much up to this point.
All right. So with that in mind, let's transition from the macro to the micro. I think you did a nice job of laying out the baseline of 30 to 35 wins, which I think, assuming no major injuries, is fair. We should point out that when we say no major injuries, we acknowledge that over 82 games, 6 months of basketball, of course, there's going to be sprained ankles, there's going to be knickknacks. But when we make these projections, we're talking about nothing crazy like a broken wrist or a torn ACL for Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet, Alperen Sengun, and so on and so forth. The guys you're really, really leaning on. Assuming there's nothing catastrophic to the rotation guys, and they're hopefully all able to go out there for 60 plus games, then yeah, I agree with you. 30 is the minimum. If it's in the 20s, it feels like, again, I don't know where you go from here. And hopefully, I think 35, once you start getting mid to upper 30s, then that means at a bare minimum, you're at least on the fringe of contention for the play-in tournament. You're playing meaningful basketball and a relevant team heading into 2024. And that's the kind of thing that can establish you on the national landscape. And even if you aren't able to develop the hymns, so to speak, from within, then you're attracted to those guys on the trade market, potentially as soon as next February's trade deadline or next off season. And the Rockets do have the matching salary. Since we last recorded the podcast, the Rockets did trade Kevin Porter Jr., brought in Victor Oladipo. That's $10 million more in expiring salary alongside Jock Landale, Jeff Green. So the money, the math is there with expiring contracts. It's just a matter of how the Rockets are perceived. And I agree with you. Another season in the 20s, but without the upside of making a coaching change or bringing in another super high draft pick or bringing in veterans with $60 million in cap space, then there wouldn't be a clear next step. You'd just be sort of waiting and hoping that maybe this is the year that Amen Thompson or Cam Whitmore takes the leap. And while you can always hope, it would be tough to sell from a Rockets perspective. I think in terms of making the franchise desirable to fans and more importantly players around the league, you need to win in the 30s at a minimum. You need to be relevant, and that doesn't necessarily require a 500 or better record, but you need to be a lot closer than you've been the last couple of years. So in terms of the micro, what does that mean? Let's look at the first 9 games of the season, because to me that's the first stretch. You've got your opener Wednesday in Orlando, then Friday in San Antonio, and then a 7-game homestand. This is so much of a friendlier open than the last couple of years when the Rockets had these long road trips right out of the chute, and it felt like they were buried before the season even started. Last year, everybody knew that Stephen Silas needed a hot start to salvage his job, and it was obvious by the middle of November where this thing was headed. This year, it's the opposite. Ime Udoka wants to build momentum, and he has every opportunity to do so. Orlando and San Antonio, they're young teams like the Rockets, but they don't have any more proven veterans. If anything, they have less when you consider who the Rockets brought in this offseason. In my opinion, it's perfectly reasonable to expect the Rockets to be able to win one of those games. And then you look at the homestand. Charlotte, which is Wednesday, is a game you should be favored in. The Pelicans, who you dominated in the preseason with most of their main guys out there, Not going to say you're clearly favored, but I think if the Rockets are what we think they are, that's probably a toss-up game. The Kings are a good team, but certainly not overwhelming. You have a back-to-back against them. You will be underdogs against the Warriors and the Lakers, although to be determined if the Warriors have Draymond for that one. I just think that if you're as good as the Rockets are, I shouldn't say as good as the Rockets are, as good as we think they are, which is capable, relevant, you should be able to win 3 games out of a 7-game homestand. Hopefully you do better than that, but let's set the bar low. They are integrating new pieces, and you can sell me on the idea that, and Frank was doing it in our Locked on Rockets preview, that the Warriors and Kings with all of their motion offense might be a little bit rough for a Rockets team that's still in the first month of sort of learning the system and each other and trying to play together in terms of talking on the defensive end and how they switch and all those dynamics. Okay, you can tell me that. But at a bare minimum, I think a 7-game homestand, if you're a capable team and you're mostly healthy, which they are outside of Tari Eason with the lower leg injury, sounds like he's out for 2 to 3 weeks, which will probably take him through the first 9 games, unfortunately. But other than Tari, they're healthy. I think 3 of 7 is a fair minimum expectation, and then splitting the 2 road games in Orlando and San Antonio. So for me, if the Rockets are what we think they are, I think 4 and 5 is perfectly reasonable. And in a softer part of the schedule, that puts you potentially where you need to be to ultimately get to that, 30 to, let's say, 38 win range. You predicted 35, so let's use, something like that as the midpoint. Let's say 30 to 38. I think out of a stretch that's fairly soft in terms of a couple of rebuilding teams to open up and then 7 home games, no back-to-backs in there, then to be a team in the 30s, if you're relatively healthy, you should win at least 4 of those games. That's my expectation. I don't think 3 and 6 would be devastating. I do think 2 and 7 or worse would be, because this is a fairly soft stretch. But for me, I'm going into it and thinking, hey, after these first 9 games, after this homestand ends on Sunday the 12th against Denver, this should be a 4 and 5 basketball team. Is that a fair outlook for you?
I'm actually a little bit more demanding than you are. I think 3 and 6 is pretty bad, just because, listen, this is the easy part of the schedule. Things are going to get harder, so you're going to need to make up to be better than expected. If you are to get to the 30 to 38 wins that you mentioned, you're going to need to be better than expected at the beginning, because you're likely going to lose out on pace. You're likely going to lose pace in the midway part of the season. So I think the Spurs and the Magic games are winnable. I think the Hornets game's winnable. I don't think the Kings games are unwinnable, but they're going to be tough. I think the Lakers are stinking it up right now against the Nuggets, but it's the Nuggets, so who knows? But the Rockets usually show up against the Lakers, even though it's usually at Staples Center, not in Toyota Center. But the Pelicans are not unbeatable. I wouldn't be surprised if we finished above them in the standings, depending on how Zion looks and everything like that. But I think 4 and 5 is like the minimum. If we're going to project this team to win 30 to 36 games, I think that's basically the minimum. Just because after that you're going to face rougher teams. I think it's not unrealistic to see 6 and 3. Just looking at if they win the first couple of games, which I think are fairly winnable, that's 2. I think beating the Hornets is a must. I mean, if you're not beating the Hornets, what are you doing? That's 3. I think the Pelicans are beatable. That's 4. I think the Lakers are beatable. That's 5. And I think they could steal a win. I don't think they're beating the Nuggets, but they could steal a win from either the Kings or the Warriors, depending on how that goes. The other thing that I would mention as an early trend for the season is the Rockets got fairly lucky with the timing. Actually, Houston teams have gotten fairly lucky with the timing and injuries and stuff like that. The Texans are going to face the Titans, who are selling, and the Rockets are going to face the Grizzlies, if I'm not mistaken, 3 times, who are without Steven Adams and while Ja Morant is suspended for the first 25 games of the season. So that's going to help us as well, because the Grizzlies, I would project them to be like a top 4 seed at the end, but they're going to play without Ja for 25 games. So that should help them as well. But it also cannot be understated that I think Tari Eason's injury hurts a lot. We have guys to sub in for him, right? Reggie Bullock's going to be fine. Cam Whitmore's probably going to be fine as well. But they're not Tari Eason.
More minutes.
You can. That's rough. Because spacing, but
Yeah.
Torreson at this point is not just I think he's not just someone who's better than his backups because he has more potential, or it's I think Torreson is legitimately a positive NBA contributor right now that brings a different dimension of energy to the game. That's just to me miles ahead of his backups. And so to me he's a fairly big loss. So I'll take back the 3-6 start being unacceptable, but it would still be disappointing.
It would be underwhelming. And we should point out, with regards to the expectations, the Vegas over-under is 31.5. So it's not like we're just Rockets fans drinking the Kool-Aid. Vegas is projecting a nearly 10-win upgrade based on what the Rockets did this offseason. So if we're talking about a team in the 20s again, either there's widespread injuries to the point where you just throw all these expectations to the wayside because the team looks radically different, or something went very wrong with regards to the majority of the expectations that we have for these players and how they should fit together going into the season. So that's why we're talking about these first 9 games and what has you on track to be in that, somewhere in the 30s at the end of this year, assuming health, because it's not just us. Yeah, we want the team to do well, but also nationally, there's lots of people who are buying in on the talent of this team. There's lots of intriguing young prospects. You've got capable veteran starters to supplement them. This team has every opportunity to be relevant. And I should also note that the first couple of games, Jabari Smith Jr. against Paolo Banchero, the matchup of 2 top 3 picks from 2022, then Jabari against Wemby in San Antonio on Friday night. A couple of big games to sort of put Jabari's early growth to the test. Now, how much will Jabari actually guard those guys to be determined? My suspicion is that, as we saw some during the preseason, Dylan Brooks, because even though he's a little bit shorter, we know how stocky he is. He's got the strong frame. Will get those types of assignments, especially on Paolo. That's my strong suspicion. But regardless, for Jabari, those are 2 guys that were very high draft picks, obviously number 1 overall in both cases, the last 2 drafts. He would love to make a statement, even if they're not always guarding one another one-on-one. I think it's a great opportunity for Jabari to show just how far he's come from that underwhelming rookie season. So those are the trends to look out for. And as far as the record, I agree. 3 to me is the bare minimum. If they're 2-7 or worse, then something is, I'm not going to say that everything is pointless after 9 games, that the season is lost, but they're not where we think they are if they are 2-7 after one of the easier 9 games that you'll have of the year when you combine who they play to open up the year and then a 7-game homestand. 3 is the minimum. I think 4 is the expectation, and there's absolutely a world where you might have a winning record after all of this. It's manageable to start the year, and that's a great thing for Ime Udoka as he installs his new system and, more importantly, his new culture. All right, as we wind down the pod, I want to talk about the roster that the Rockets have finalized in the last 24 hours. Of course, NBA teams can have up to 21 players in the offseason, but you have to trim that by the regular season at the end of the preseason to 15 standard contracts and up to 3 guys on 2-way deals, which are basically the NBA's version of minor league contracts, allow them to go back and forth between the G League and the NBA. They can play in up to 50 games at the NBA level while on those contracts. The big moves for the Rockets, and they're not big moves, but I suppose the only moves they made from a decision standpoint, they kept Boban and released Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who they got as a throw-in the Kevin Porter Jr. Victor Oladipo trade with the Thunder. And they also made the decision to put Nate Williams and Nate Hinton on 2-way deals, letting go of Trevor Hudgens and Darius Days, keeping Jermaine Samuels Jr., who was already on a 2-way deal. Samuels and Hinton played big roles for the Rockets on their 5-1 summer league team that finished as runners up in the NBA's tournament in Las Vegas this July. Both are versatile forwards. Nate Williams, more of a guard, but he's someone who can fill it up, average nearly 10 points per game in 10 minutes during the preseason. And for a Rockets team in the aftermath of losing KPJ, that's an NBA-ready skill that they might need. There were times, especially the 2 games that Jalen missed in the preseason, that you could see a need for a bucket getter, and that's what Nate Williams is. And so I think when you're looking at 2-way guys, you want them to have one NBA-ready skill that you could perhaps plug and play if you're in a tight spot. And so Nate Williams, to me, with what he showed as a scorer in the preseason, that was an obvious move. And then from there, I think it just came down to the fact that Samuels and Hinton were two of your marquee players in summer league, and they largely outplayed Hudgens and Days. Well, Hudgens had a nice summer league, but I just think at Hudgens' size, it's so tough to see the roadmap for him to be a rotation level player in the NBA. He would have to shoot at just a phenomenal level, like 40% plus from three, and maybe not even then that, or be like an off the charts Chris Paul level point guard. And we haven't seen any signs of that either. So ultimately, I think the Rockets made decisions that are largely defensible. And we should also throw the Kevin Porter Jr. trade in there because, as we talked about, this is our first episode since the deal. I think our comments got proven right in that the Rockets were able to move KPJ. 2 seconds was not an enormous price. I know we wished it would have been from the 2024 allotment, but ultimately moving him for 2 seconds, or I suppose including 2 seconds to offload KPJ and get back tradable salary in Victor Oladipo for the reasons we've outlined in this show and many others, wanting the optionality to go after stars down the line. It's a nice movement by Rafael Stone, and ultimately he did not have to pay a premium because of the PR factors. It was a fairly reasonable deal that the Rockets struck with the Thunder. The one thing I would say, I saw some pushback on social media. I guess my biggest takeaway about these moves, there was a lot of disappointment, at least on my feed, about keeping Boban, a 35-year-old veteran who can only be used in select matchups. Largely, they just have him for culture because he's beloved in the locker room and on the practice court and so on and so forth. There were a lot of people that wanted Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who was a high second round pick in 2021, a much younger guy, just 22 years old. I think it's very reminiscent of when the Rockets offloaded Usman Garuba and Ty Washington, and we saw first Atlanta and then Oklahoma City. Their fans tried to hype themselves up on getting a steal before ultimately they were, well, in Atlanta's case, not just released, they were traded with a second round pick to offload them, and then the Thunder ended up releasing them all together. The point is, it was a business transaction that fans tried to squint really hard and find some basketball reason for, because nobody likes to talk about deals that are made just to save billionaires a few bucks, but ultimately that's the NBA. And of course, Usman and Tai are both on two-way deals now. No one valued them on standard contracts at above the minimum because they were both first round picks in 2021 and 2022. And it's a similar dynamic here with Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who had a guaranteed deal for this year. The Rockets and Thunder could have made that deal. Oladipo for KPJ straight up would have worked. The Thunder included Earl because they wanted to help trim down their roster. And instead of releasing him themselves, the Rockets doing it means that Houston is going to be the team, assuming he's not claimed on waivers, that is ultimately paying that salary. That was the motivation for the deal. I think a lot of Rockets fans, when the deal happened, tried to talk themselves into Rafael Stone seeing something in Jeremiah Robinson Earl and wanted the trade to look good. So, you squint hard enough and you can make any of these prospects look better than they are if you look up their YouTube highlight clips, which you can make a lot of guys look good if you just clip 10 minutes and put it together of their best highlights. I think the proof was already in the pudding, and you're free to disagree with the logic, but when the Rockets re-signed Boban to a partially guaranteed deal in early September, they had an open roster spot. If they were going to go the youth and upside route for that role as sort of your veteran backup center, third or fourth string, I guess, there were guys available this offseason. They could have just kept Usman Garuba, or they could have signed Garuba back after he ultimately got waived. They went with Boban because they wanted the veteran. And that's why I was a bit surprised that, quite frankly, other people were surprised this week by the Rockets picking Boban over Jeremiah Robinson Earl. That choice was already obvious by the fact that the Rockets gave any guaranteed money to Boban in the first place. There were plenty of other young guys they could have signed or traded for from other teams who were getting ready to trim down their rosters. The Rockets already made that choice. Them taking Robinson Earl was nothing more than doing a solid for the Thunder because Oklahoma City was taking KPJ's larger contract at about $15 million. They were only giving back Victor Oladipo, who's a little under 10. So the Rockets, they couldn't reasonably say, no, we won't take this $2 million salary for Jeremiah Robinson Earl. So the Rockets took it, and then they waived him. It was pretty clear to me that's what was coming. Some were surprised. I would say the ultimate takeaway on that is just don't try to find a basketball reason for every move. Many of these deals are strictly business. That's what this was. The Rockets re-signed Boban because they want that veteran presence. You may disagree with that. That's completely reasonable, but we've already known they were going down this path from the moment they signed Boban and gave him any guaranteed money in early September. I don't know if it's the right move, but I will say for a Rockets team that's had issues with culture the last couple of years, it's pretty clear. I'm not going to begrudge them for erring on the side of a guy who's as beloved as Boban and hopefully makes it easier for those young prospects to develop and puts them in the right frame of mind on a daily basis. So that's sort of my takeaway on those moves. I don't see anything too egregious. I will say that, with the two-way slots, it is possible there could be a move later on because there's guys released around the league. We know this team could probably use more shooting. So it is possible that, they have Nate Williams, Nate Hinton, and Samuels Jr. on the two ways now. Somebody could get waived if they need a spot to claim someone that passes through waivers. Time will tell. But of the three, I think Nate Williams is the guy because of that ready-made scoring skill. I think he's the safest. My guess is Nate Hinton is probably the least safe because they prioritize giving Jermaine Samuels a deal before Hinton this offseason. So my guess is that of the three, Williams is the most safe, and he's someone that, if there's any injuries, might even play at the NBA level, depending on what you need on a given night. We still have to see how much Reggie Bullock has left in the tank. And then my guess is that if they need a spot later on to claim someone off waivers or make a signing, then Nate Hinton is the one most likely to be released. That's sort of my lay of the land. I think it's defensible. I don't see anything that's super noteworthy out of that. Anything you want to add on that front, Paolo, before we close out the show?
Yeah, it was sort of underwhelming. I mean, they kept so there were a few things that I was looking forward to with the KPJ trade. Don't give up a first, which they accomplished. If you can get shooting good, if you can get a salary that is basically either expiring or non-guaranteed next year, and non-guaranteed next year would be a bonus in this because it would work like a human trade player exception. There were a couple of cases that could potentially work with this. One from OKC as well, which would be Davis Bertans. Even though people think that his contract is the worst in the league, well, I think it's only a year and one non-guaranteed year left now, so it's no longer one of the worst contracts in the league. Or my favorite, which is Landry Shamet, who has a KPJ type deal already at a lower price. They couldn't get it done. They got an expiring instead, which is, just as good, but for one less year. They'll have that flexibility for this year. Who knows if Oladipo will be able to play, but that's not the point. Don't expect this wasn't a trade for Oladipo, it was a trade for the contract. So yeah, I mean, I would have much rather have given up picks in 2024, but maybe they have a reason that they haven't done that, because there's been a few trades with second round picks that have happened already. And in the Garuba deal, the late first round picks being dumped, and now this, in which they have elected, or who knows if it was elected or the other teams just preferred it this way, where they gave up future second round picks instead of the second round picks they have this year, in which they have 4, if I'm not mistaken, or 3. Maybe they see a market inefficiency. Maybe they think that those will be more valuable at the end of the year. Maybe they, will try to move up in the second round, and they'd rather have those picks instead. I don't know, but it was sort of underwhelming for me as trade. But once again, we're talking about second round picks, right? It's not that consequential. It was mostly a flexibility move, and second round picks come and go. I mean, the Rockets got a second round pick from the Nets a couple of years back for taking a minimum salary from Doumbouya or whatever it was. That's how easy it is to get second round picks nowadays. And the Rockets are still a team that is well below the luxury tax, so they could still take minimum. If a team, come the buyout market, the team needs to make up a little, or not. The trade deadline was just a little bit before the buyout market, but if a team wants to play the contender wants to play in the buyout market, and wants to dump a minimum salary so they can sign another minimum salary and stay below the luxury tax, the Rockets will still be a player in those talks. They could still get second round picks back. They're the most liquid asset in the NBA, second round picks, because they just throw them around. But talking about the two ways, personally, I would have gone with Matthew Mayer, Nate Hinton, and Darius Days.
Interesting. So you wouldn't do Nate Williams? That surprises me.
I wouldn't, just because I saw less of him. I mean, he was impressive during preseason, so maybe him and Nate Hinton would be a toss-up, but I would be biased towards the U of H guy.
I guess the reason that I would argue with you on this. I think it's not just who's the best player for those contracts, but who's the most likely to get claimed and not get claimed by another team. Like I think Matthew Mayer is a guy who's a good bet to actually make it to the Vipers and not get claimed, as opposed to Nate Williams, because he is a guy who can sort of put up points, that NBA ready skill right now. To me, that makes it more likely that somebody who has a need, one of these 29 other teams is more likely to say, you know what, I need this for the next couple of weeks, so I'm going to put in a claim and see what happens. Whereas a guy who's a little bit more of a longer term play, like, Matthew, but I would say Hinton as well, they might be, well, Hinton, of course, they did get the two-way, but I think you have to consider not just how good they are, but what their likelihood is of not making it to the Vipers. Because I think the hope is that some of these guys ultimately are still going to make it to the Vipers. Like, I think they do have affiliate player rights on Trevor Hudgens, David Weiner, Beamathog on Twitter pointed out. And so that's another sort of element that you can consider on that front. So that's the only thing that I would add. It's not just how good the player is, it's also what are the odds that you can ultimately still keep them with the Vipers and have that option, should they play well, open to you at a later time.
The way I look at it, right? It's the who has the most translatable skill set to the NBA is usually who I'll prioritize giving the two ways to. Nate Williams showed that he could be a scorer, but how many teams truly are looking for a scorer out of a two-way spot? Usually you can get those guys for the minimum. There's plenty of them out there. Or, you already have them on your roster. Usually, the way I look at it, maybe I'm biased because of how the Rockets have handled them. I'm looking at as you said, a skill set that translates to the NBA, but that besides scoring. So usually, if it's a good defender that you can throw into a matchup, that works. If it's a really good shooter like Garrison Matthews, that works as well. If it's a rim protecting center who's just a rim runner, that works as well. Usually, very simplified skill sets, except scoring, because scoring is really easy to get. Usually, let me say it's not a huge deal. I would have gone for, I said, Mayer because he's a sharpshooter, Nate Hinton because he is a 3-and-D wing. And who was the other one that I'm forgetting? Darius State, because
no, sorry.
I would have gone with Darius State just because he is 6'8". He can kind of play small ball 5. He's really beefy and he has a really good shot. So I valued him. He'll probably be my number one guy overall in all of these waivers. But as I said, it's not a big deal. It's basically just nitpicking at this point. But I did want to say one last thing. I don't know if you have anything else on the two ways.
No.
I just wanted to mention one last thing because I had my Sengun rant of the week,
Okay.
and I forgot to mention one thing. I think a lot of people are crediting him struggling offensively to it being preseason, or that he is a good offensive player, so he'll figure it out. I think he's struggling offensively for a little bit of a deeper reason than that, and I'll get proven right or wrong. But to me, he's struggling offensively because he's playing at a pace that he's not used to. The game's going way too fast. He's clearly off rhythm. He's missing, layups. He's missing dunks. He's missing the little baby hooks that he gets so easily. He's just rushing everything. And to me, that comes from the fact that he's being asked to run up and down the floor, in a way that he wasn't last year or a couple of years back, because we weren't good enough on defense to force the turnovers, and we didn't play as fast on offense as we do now. And that's mostly what I meant when I said I don't know if he fits even offensively with the style that this team wants to play, because to me it feels like he's struggling because he's rushing a lot and he's completely off rhythm. And that's the reason he's missing the baby hooks. It's also part of the reason why he's missing the free throws. The entire touch thing is off because this is not what his skill set's built to play. This is not the way he played basically at any point. So yeah, there's someone to get that in, just so I remember that I didn't mention it before, and the point was maybe too weak before on the offensive standpoint. I want to get that one in.
Fair point. And to those people saying it's just the preseason, well, that changes Wednesday night in Orlando. It's about to get very real. So in terms of whether this can resolve itself when the intensity raises, we are about to find out. Stay tuned. Anyway, that's enough for one show, so we will break it here. We've already gone on long enough. I wanted to get in some Astros, I don't even know what the word is. It's probably just crying, but you know what? We'll save that for the future because I think in the immediate aftermath, still less than 24 hours from the Astros elimination, let's not talk about it. That was painful. We can talk Astros more proactively as the Rockets, or as the Astros, excuse me, enter a critical offseason. They'll probably have a new manager replacing Dusty Baker, and then we'll see what happens with any free agents, any trades they make. I will say, as we're recording this, the Diamondbacks are beating the Phillies. I'm going to be inconsolable if the Astros were one game from facing the freaking Arizona Diamondbacks, that being the only thing in their way of a second consecutive World
Hey,
Series. That
respect the
would kill me.
Snakes.
I know, but it's an 84 win
they're,
team.
they're gonna beat the Rangers. We must believe if they make
Yeah.
it.
Well, I'm pulling for the Phillies because I think that's a lot more doable. So we'll see. Probably by the time this episode is uploaded, listeners will know who won. So hopefully the Phillies have one more comeback in them because I think they're much more likely to beat the Rangers and keep the Astros as the only World Series winner in Texas. All right, that's enough talk for one episode, so we'll break it here for anybody wanting more content. Before we return, of course, we'll be more regular now that the Rockets are back in season. The best place to get content in the interim from us is online, where you can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA, and this show at The Logger Line. And if you go to The Logger Line's page, you'll find our link tree, which has links to our distribution partners like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe and leave a positive review at your location of choice, we'd greatly appreciate it. Also, on that same link tree, you can find links to friends, sponsors, and partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carback Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links and you can enjoy their content as well. All right, with the plugs complete, we'll adjourn for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.